My name is Natasha Kazim. I'm the Executive Associate Dean for Operations here at the School of Public Health, as well as the Chair over the Volunteer Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. I invite you all to feel free to use the chat feature to introduce yourself to each other to include your organization, program, and school. So the DEI task force is composed of faculty, staff, and students who work alongside the school's DEI committee in anchoring our community towards inclusive operating principles to bring rich programming to our school and to create an environment in which anyone that interacts with our school feels welcome. A special shout out to Tania Valmore, the manager of the task force, for her assistance with standing up this session today. Before we begin, I would like to start this session, like all others, with a land acknowledgement. The George Washington University's Foggy Bottom campus borders the confluence of the Anacostia and Potomac rivers, a historic center of trade and cultural exchange between several tribal nations. For generations, the Piscataway and Anacostian peoples have resided in this region and served as stewards of the local land and waterways. Their people continue to thrive in the region and still honor and celebrate their culture and relationship with the land. I want to acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to lands in which we all gather. For today's session, I will be doing a type of virtual fireside chat with our very own Dr. Eliot Sorel, an innovative global health leader, health systems performance expert, practicing physician, and clinical professor of global health, health policy and management, and psychiatry and behavioral sciences here at GW. In this session, we will examine the life and legacy of the former psychiatrist, Dr. Chester Pierce. Dr. Pierce was a pioneer and thought leader in addressing health disparities. He was the first African-American full professor at Mass Gen Hospital and a founding president of the Black Psychiatrists of America. Additionally, Dr. Pierce served as a senior advisor to the acclaimed children's show, Sesame Street. Following Dr. Sorel's presentation of the life of Dr. Pierce, we will then go ahead and open up the session for Q&A. Dr. Sorel, thank you so much for joining us today and for agreeing to do this session with our community. For those who may not have had the pleasure of taking your classes or working with you, can you share with the audience a little bit more about your expertise?
Sure. Thank you very much, Natasha and Tanya, for facilitating this historic event. And thank you very much to Dean Goldman for creating the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force at GW School of Public Health. And for you, Natasha, for leading it with such talent and creativity and vision. It is truly a privilege today to have this opportunity to talk about my friend, Professor Chester Pierce, and also at a historic time and moment in our country where the first African-American judge has been nominated for potential position on the US Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. We live also in extraordinary times. A lot is going on in the world, and I will try to bring that in connection with Chester Pierce's vision of humanity and of global citizenship. I am a professor at GW, both in the School of Medicine and School of Public Health. I teach global mental health in the School of Public Health as part of one of the courses that we give in the Department of Global Health. And I'm also a professor of clinical psychiatry in the School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm also pleased to know and let you know that we're starting an interesting practice in the School of Public Health. And just last week, I was asked if I would invite and allow some of our students, applicants in the School of Public Health. They're eager to sit in my class. So, of course, would love to do it. And I responded to the department. I'd like to also have the students involved in the decision. So as the class meets tomorrow, I'll be asking my students, with their permission, we would invite some of the applicants in the School of Public Health to take advantage of sitting in one of our global mental health classes and get a taste of what and how we teach this at GW.
Thank you, Dr. Sorel. I remember a couple of years ago very vividly the conversation that you and I had in my office when you first introduced me to your late dear friend and colleague, Chester Pierce. Can you talk to us about when you first met Dr. Pierce and what moved you to wanting to do this session with us today?
Yes, I remember very well how we first met. In fact, at that time, I had just a few years before that, I met him, was in 1980s. I had returned from the Caribbean, where after finishing my training in psychiatry at Yale, my very first job was to develop a family health center in the Caribbean. So I lived in the West Indies for 2 years, where we developed a family health center that had also a mental health clinic in it, in an integrated whole system. I was attending one of the Howard University Grand Rounds at which Professor Chester Pierce was presenting. And I was inspired by his vision and his mission, and followed up after that meeting, explored ways that he and I could collaborate. That was roughly in the late 1980s.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sorel. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to you to talk to us about the life of your dear friend.
Thank you very much, Natasha. What followed shortly, a few years after we met in that memorable meeting at Howard, the Grand Rounds, I became increasingly concerned of the events taking place in Europe, particularly in Germany, where Nazis were firebombing the homes of so-called guest workers in Germany. And I became, of course, more informed and aware of Dr. Pierce's concept of microaggressions. So I reached out to him if he and I, with others, could do a program in Germany at that time in the early 1990s regarding these aggressions against Turkish guest workers. And he readily agreed. We then developed a unique and memorable symposium in Hamburg, Germany, that Dr. Pierce and I, together with a judge from the Supreme Court of South Africa and one of the attorneys of Mr. Mandela, did a symposium on microaggression in Hamburg, Germany at that time. We remained very closely involved with each other ever since the early 1990s. And I'll come back to some other issues and other collaborations we did, but I want to spend a few minutes to talk a little bit about my friend. He was a psychiatric physician, a Harvard gentleman, a scholar athlete, the first African-American president of his high school graduating class, a founder of Black Psychiatrists of America, and truly, above all, a superb human being. He was an innovative researcher with a focus on stressful and deprived environments, including Antarctica. He was the first, as you mentioned, the first African-American full professor at Massachusetts General Hospital at the Harvard Medical School, and also the president of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and a commander, lieutenant commander in the US Navy. When I became chairman of the board of the World Association for Social Psychiatry, I also invited, and he graciously accepted, to be a member of the board of the World Association for Social Psychiatry. What linked us spontaneously was the idea of, and the pervasive idea of, microaggressions in our society and in many societies across the world. His innovative idea of microaggression, I believe, is especially relevant to contemporary society, as many organizations and companies in the United States and the public and private sector are pursuing the quest of diversity, equity, and inclusion nationally, globally, and across health, educational, corporate, professional organizations, and political systems. He was truly a visionary. The idea and the concept that he promoted then, more than 30 years ago, are very much relevant to today. His prescient voice speaks loudly to us across time as we collectively grapple with the violation of human rights on display in our beloved America and across the world. We also felt that as psychiatrists, we are uniquely equipped both to contribute substantively to the conversation on human rights, as he did, and to find constructive ways to address its denial. And he exemplified that superbly when he addressed the board of the American Psychiatric Association and demonstrated the inequities existent at the time in the American Psychiatric Association in the late 1960s, as well as in the institutions of the federal government, including the National Institute of Mental Health. And he reached out to the then Secretary of Health, Education and Welfare, Mr. Gardner, to point out to him that there are no African-American physicians in positions of leadership at the National Institute of Mental Health, yet the NIMH was embarking on studying and studies on African-American populations with no representations on the panels of any African-American colleagues. Additionally, the board of the American Psychiatric Association had no African-Americans on the board. He founded the Black Psychiatrists Association in 1969 and was its first president, and extracted, and I'll emphasize, extracted an agreement from the American Psychiatric Association then to establish a Black Psychiatrist caucus that was appointed so-called ad hoc, that meaning just for 1 year, in 1969, and pursued that fight continuously, both at NIMH and at the APA. And the NIMH consequently began to appoint African Americans to be part of the panels of the institutions. He had an uncanny ability to capture timeless truth, reflecting his deep understanding of what ails humankind. He was able to formulate solutions for what impedes expression of our fullest humanity. Dr. Pierce was truly a visionary who could project into the future of what is needed to bring about individual change so that fundamental societal change can be made real. And as you know, we are still struggling to bring about this fundamental societal change even now in our country and in the world. In his statement, Becoming a Planetary Citizen, A Quest for Meaning, dating back nearly 50 years ago, Dr. Pierce described a future world and outlined a skill set he believed necessary for children and the next generation of professionals to acquire in order to be successful. He opined that to accomplish that, we must develop a mindset that would give greater credence to other people's ideas, to correlate and integrate ideas from various disciplines across barriers that now separate us. The only way we can live, he thought, will be to become planetary citizens, to inject the future more deliberately into education and preparation for adulthood, as change in the technological era, and pay close attention to this. He truly was a visionary. He stated that to prepare children for adulthood, we must be mindful of the changes in the technological era will occur in less time than we might anticipate. The present, we know, will not be sufficient to prepare them for the future that is coming. To understand the implications of pollution, increased consumptions of raw material, energy sources, and protein by a minority of the world's population that will endanger the survival of the human species on this planet. To cultivate skills in conflict resolution, sound decision-making, and learning to control one's destiny through collaboration rather than through excessive destructive competition. Ongoing segregation of our urban centers creates distance between groups of people, feeds xenophobia, and makes common ground more difficult to identify. These prophetic and visionary statements, had they been heeded 50 years ago, perhaps the degree of violence we now witness in our society and worldwide would have been at least diminished, if not prevented. He also had a profound belief and a positive belief in a better future. To that end, he devoted a great
Hey,
deal of his
Myra, it's
time.
Pamela. I just saw your text message. Would love to just touch bases with you via phone. Just leave me
Sorry,
a
can
voice
you
message so
please
you can
mute
call me back.
everybody that is on the
Thank
line?
you.
Sorry, yeah.
So he had a keen interest in children and profound belief in their ability to transform and create a better world for us. And he put those beliefs to work as a senior consultant to Sesame Street from its inception, to impact a positive thinking in the life of children throughout the world with these important developmental concepts that he outlined. Sesame Street, the public television program that he was a senior consultant to, is now aired in more than 140 countries and carries the distinction of being the most popular and the most tested and researched children's television program of all time. I was privileged also to be in touch with some of the colleagues, doctors that he mentored. And I want to just quote one of them, what he said to me about his mentor, my friend, Dr. Chester Pierce. He said, with a brilliant mind and soft-spoken warmth, Dr. Pierce continuously reached out to those who were potentially marginalized, whether by virtue of race, socioeconomic background, immigrant status, or simply being a junior faculty member in a new place. Like so many thousands of psychiatrists, I benefited from his unique personal kindnesses and remarkable contributions, which are well honored by the Chester Pierce Human Rights Award. This was shared with me by Dr. Jonathan Alpert, who at the moment, who was a mentee of Dr. Chester Pierce, and at the moment chairs the American Psychiatric Association Research Council. I want to bring into focus a couple of other very important contributions and events. Along the line of promoting global solidarity and attending to underserved populations, Professor Chester Pierce convened for the first time the African diaspora meeting of Black psychiatrists from throughout the world at Massachusetts General Hospital in November of 2002. I was honored to be asked to be one of his consultants for this historic meeting, and I gladly accepted. Out of that meeting, many relationships, collaborative relationships were developed that are enduring to date. Some of the projected initiatives did not pan out immediately. And when I visited Harvard again a few years later, I asked my colleagues, what are the updates on the Black diaspora meeting that we held in 2002? And there were no immediate updates at the moment. And I said, well, we must rekindle it. And so we did. So in 2016, we held the second African diaspora meeting, this time also convened by Harvard in collaboration with Boston University, and I was part of the conveners group, and the Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And we held the second African diaspora meeting in South Africa, in Cape Town, where at the time of that meeting, the World Psychiatric Association was also meeting. And it was in that meeting that we broached the subject of naming the American Psychiatric Association Human Rights Award in the name of Dr. Chester Pierce, that I'm happy to inform is now a reality. We have been grateful for the generous contributions that we received from nearly 150 people from throughout the United States and the world, who endowed in perpetuity the Chester Pierce Human Rights Award at the American Psychiatric Association, that will be launched with that name and fully endowed this year at the American Psychiatric Association's meeting. I wanted to express also my gratitude to Dr. Chester Pierce's family, who worked closely with me and others, nearly 150 people, to endow this prize. And their support and their encouragement were critical in us reaching this happy moment of endowing the Chester Pierce Human Rights Award. I'm happy now to engage in a dialogue with you all.
Thank you, Dr. Sorel, for that powerful story behind a man I'm sure many of us did not know, but clearly had such deep impact. And all of us today are reaping the benefits of his hard work and legacy. I see within the attendance that there are members of the Pierce family here with us today. I'd like to just give them a special shout out and also offer them the opportunity to participate or provide any comments as they see fit. At this time, we can certainly take questions from the audience for Dr. Sorel.
Yes, Dean Goldman.
Hi there, Eliot. Such a pleasure to hear this presentation. And I have to admit that I was not aware of this entire history. It was really wonderful to hear. And so I thought it might be really helpful to all of us, your perspective as a psychiatrist, the entire issue of dealing, with micro slights, micro oppression of all types. For many of us, it's a newer concept, and how you in your profession, have had become aware of it, and what you would recommend to all of us on this line who are academics or who work with younger people or work in diverse settings. And I think, as you said, as settings become more and more diverse, it opens up the possibility for more of those things to occur, actually. And so I just love to hear from you some advice, maybe even for me, about that. Thank you, Eliot.
Thank you, Lynn. First of all, I wanted to add one more note of gratitude. I feel grateful to be a member of the faculty of the School of Public Health. There are very few psychiatrists who are involved with School of Public Health. We need to bring public health to mental health and mental health to public health. We are practicing at GW. Regarding your question, I think what underpins a great deal of what promotes and feeds issues of microaggression. One is well known to most people. In fact, in his testimony before the American Psychiatric Association board in 1969, and I will quote my friend, if I may, he said, and I think Lynn, you'd appreciate this, "White racism is the greatest public health issue in our country. So I think I don't think that issue is resolved yet. Racism remains a huge public health issue, has not been broached as a public health issue, and it needs to be broached as one of its dimensions being a public health issue. Additionally, your initiative, Lynn, in creating a task force on diversity, equity, and inclusion creates the opportunity to counter the negativity of racism with the positivity of belonging, and sharing a common history of collaboration, innovation, and participation with equal opportunities for all is what we need to practice. I don't believe that is just the realm of psychiatry or psychiatrists. This is a societal challenge. It is an academic challenge. It is a corporate challenge. It is a whole society challenge. And we need to do it in all areas that we're active in, be it if we're academics, practicing physicians, corporate leaders, or government leaders. And I think I'm proud to be a member of your faculty, Lynn, at the School of Public Health, and to be part of the initiative of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to have been invited to make this presentation, not in the Department of Psychiatry, but under the aegis of, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Any other questions for Dr. Sorel from the audience?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Hi, Dr. Sorel. This is Jessica Isom. I'm driving back home, but really wanted to make time to hear from you today. And I wanted to ask you a question about what do you think Chester Pierce would have offered to those of us who are from a younger generation, watching everything that's happening in society right now, particularly around efforts to take us backwards as far as racial progress, efforts to address, what children are being taught in schools, efforts to even address what kind of medical education we can offer, attacks on efforts such as DEI in different institutions. Can answer the question he would have offered to us who are watching all of this and growing up during this period. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll borrow a page from my friend Chester Pierce. When he planned the first African diaspora meeting at Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital, though the primary participants are Black psychiatrists from around the world, to create a coalition, a collaborative working group to develop both enhanced access to care, enhance research, and affect health policy, he did not limit that initiative just to Black psychiatrists. He, in fact, engaged a whole group of non-Black physicians as consultants. So I think what we need to think about, Jessica, is this should be a joint collaborative struggle, not divide along color lines, racial lines. We need to find our allies in the struggle and move forward together. I think some of that is happening. I think the meeting today is an example of that. I think the collaboration between Natasha Kazim and I think is an example of what we're talking about. And we need to find out, our country now is going through the spasms of people being abused, people being killed, and others feeling that they are losing their being part of society. So there is a struggle for belonging and an exacerbation, perhaps, of racial tensions that are continuing to exist, that will require our commitment to collaborative initiatives across ethnic and racial lines. Almost in a way reminiscent a bit of my youth of the 1960s, of collaboratives across ethnic cultural groups to bring about the changes that we did witness in the 1960s. It is amazing that 50 years later, reading Dr. Pierce's statement before the board of APA, that we still have to deal and struggle with those issues. But I think these alliances need to be rekindled, fortified, and institutionalized in all institutions, academic, corporate, public and private, many such initiatives of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Dr. Sorel, we have a question in the chat from Adrian James. Thanks so much for the talk, Eliot. Greetings from the UK. Chester was a truly inspiring psychiatrist and human being. We have an equality action plan at RC Psych. What are the main lessons for us now that we can learn from the life and actions of Chester?
Adrian, thank you very much for making the time to join us from the UK. And also, given your position of leadership as the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, I wonder if you have examined your own institution, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, to what extent you are practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion or not, and how can you improve it? I think that exercise may be a place to start and open a dialogue, an open dialogue with your colleagues in the Royal College. And we'll be glad to participate and share with you some of our lessons learned, and we'll be keen to learn from you. I think kicking off a transatlantic dialogue on diversity, equity, and inclusion in professional organizations like the Royal College would be a worthwhile place to start if that proved to be of mutual interest. What do you think? Feel free to respond. I hope you could respond and the audience could hear your reply.
Yeah, hi, Eliot. Really great to be with you. Yes, we had a very wide consultation when we developed our equality action plans, and we've got 29 very clear actions. One of which is that I and the chief executive are held to account for following through on those actions. Because one thing that I was immediately made aware of is that lots of people have looked into these issues. They promised to do things, they've just not followed through on them. So I think that's really important, that people need to see that you're saying things, but you're actually doing things and following through. We started really with collecting data, but in order for people to give data, people actually have to trust what you're going to do with it. So building trust and people actually seeing that you're acting on data when you've got it. So we are looking at the training of all our psychiatrists. We're looking at our curriculum, decolonializing our curriculum, but also making sure that our psychiatrists are equipped to really participate at the highest level in equality, diversity, and inclusion work. We're also looking at various programs to support psychiatrists, so that all psychiatrists from whatever background they can give of their best. We're also looking actually at the college itself about our leadership and how we actually pay our staff. So there are several rungs of the work that we're doing, but I would love a transatlantic collaboration on this. I think, as you say, there's lots that we can learn from each other, and we could monitor what each other are doing as well. I think that would be incredibly valuable. Absolutely.
I really appreciate that you've started this process, and I hope you stay with it. You stimulated the thought, and I want to share with the group and with you and the rest of our colleagues with us. I was privileged to attend for the first time, about 2 years ago, the first African Academy of Sciences meeting that was devoted exclusively to mental health. And I learned a great deal. First, let me express to you a bias I started with. The presentation that was made was done by a professor of veterinary medicine. I said, oh my God, they're discriminating again against mental health and illness. They're assigning it to a veterinarian. But as the presentation proceeded, what I learned was the following. Because of climate change, the African pastures are diminishing. The African farmers are losing their stocks, and many of them are attempting, and some of them are completing suicides. So that population of African people is a high population at risk. So my initial bias was taken care of when I heard the substance of the research. So that's very apt to have such a professor lead the research. Additionally, one very core issue that is relevant to what you just brought up right now, Adrian, a theme that ran through the meeting was we must decolonize mental health. What was meant by that was that the conceptual schemas of mental health and mental illness have been primarily derived in Western Europe and North America by white men and applied to the rest of the world, or to both genders in all ethnic groups. I think as you are engaging the college now in the process of review and revision, it would be essential to maybe include that concept. How can we refresh, renew, and decolonize mental health and mental illness and become more inclusive and account for diversity, equity, and inclusion as we develop the science and its applications? Hope I answered your query. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay. I want to thank everyone for joining us as we close out Black History Month together today. Let the story of Chester Pierce that Dr. Sorel has shared with us stay with you, and remind each of us that if we look close enough, we can identify heroes that surround us each day, and that it is up to all of us really to tell their stories when they are no longer with us, as a testament to their gratitude and the love we have for them. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sorel.